Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. Sometimes life takes paths that are hard to predict and even harder to stop. How could I find myself at the center of a storm that would destroy everything built over the years? It didn't happen all at once, but one day I realized I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and beyond that edge awaited something forbidden, something unforgivable. No one wants to believe it can happen to them, but sometimes, when you face the truth, you understand that things have long been out of control. I wouldn't say it was love that led me. Rather, it was something else, something deep and dark. Something crept into my soul the moment I met his eyes. How did it all begin? Let's go back to that day when Adam, my sister's husband, entered my life, and something inside me broke. My story didn't begin in a dark alley or behind closed doors, but under the bright sun on the ocean shore. My husband, James, and I decided to take a long-awaited vacation and spend 2 weeks by the sea. My sister, Sarah, and her husband, Adam, joined us. It was supposed to be an ideal holiday for two families, but instead, this vacation became the point of no return. Our first day at the villa began with a clear, sunny morning. Everything seemed perfect. A warm breeze, the sea just steps away, and finally, the long-awaited rest. I woke up earlier than everyone else to greet the sunrise. The golden sun rose above the horizon, painting the sky in soft pink and orange hues. I stood on the terrace, looking at the ocean, feeling the cool breeze on my skin. Everything around seemed so calm and harmonious that I allowed myself to forget for a moment about the strange thoughts that had been troubling me lately. James was still asleep in the bedroom. We hadn't had a heart-to-heart conversation in a long time, and I couldn't remember the last time I felt passion or excitement with him. I loved him, of course, but over time, love had become more of a habit than an emotion. He was stability for me, reliability, like an anchor that held me in place but didn't allow me to move forward. I stepped away from the railing and returned to the house when I heard my phone ring. It was my sister, Sarah. She and Adam planned to go out for breakfast in the nearby town and invited me to join them. "Lauren, you won't believe how cute this little restaurant on the waterfront is. You have to come with us," Sarah said enthusiastically on the phone. "Sure," I smiled, though my heart tightened a little at the thought of seeing Adam. "I'll be ready in an hour." I tried to calm myself and return to my usual life, but I already understood that the attraction between Adam and me was beginning to surface. No matter how hard I tried to fight these feelings, they flared up with new force every time he was around. After the call, I went to take a shower, but even cold water couldn't quell the heat I felt inside. Thoughts of Adam kept resurfacing. Remembering how his gaze lingered on me a little longer than on everyone else, I felt something awakening inside me. We were close as family, but this was different. It was something wrong, yet so appealing that I couldn't ignore it. By the time I returned to the bedroom, James was already awake. He was lying in bed, browsing the news on his phone. We exchanged a few usual phrases about the upcoming day, but our conversations lacked depth. I felt a growing chasm between us, not knowing how to bridge it. Maybe I no longer wanted to. "Are you coming to town with us?" I asked, hoping he would agree and distract me from my thoughts. "No, I'll go later. I want to finish an article," James replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. I nodded and left the room, feeling a certain relief. The thought of spending time with Adam without James filled me with a mix of guilt and secret excitement. An hour later, Sarah, Adam, and I set off for the town. On the way, I tried not to look at Adam, but his presence seemed to fill the entire car. He was driving, casually talking with Sarah, but there was something more in the air. I tried to distract myself by thinking about the upcoming day, but every accidental meeting of our eyes, every smile made my heart beat faster. We arrived in town and stopped by a small restaurant on the waterfront. Wooden tables stood right by the water, and a light sea breeze refreshed us. The atmosphere was relaxing, but I felt tension inside. We ordered food, and Sarah suddenly decided to go to the shop across the street to look at souvenirs. She got up, leaving Adam and me alone at the table. The silence between us seemed unbearable for a moment, and I finally decided to speak. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" I said, trying to hide my feelings behind small talk. "Yes, very," he replied, not taking his eyes off me. "But the place isn't the main thing." His words touched me deeper than I expected. At that moment, I felt that a game between us had begun, one I couldn't stop. My mind told me it was dangerous, but my heart was no longer listening. We continued to talk, but all the words seemed empty compared to what was really happening between us. Glances, subtle movements, everything filled the space around us. I felt the tension rise, the air becoming thick, filled with something hard to describe with words. It was a moment of anticipation, a moment when everything around slows down. And you know, something important is about to happen. Sarah returned a few minutes later, bringing with her liveliness and familiar conversation. But internally, I already knew that this day had left a mark on my life. What I felt for Adam could no longer remain just thoughts. It became a reality, and I was afraid of where it would lead us. We spent the rest of the day on the waterfront, strolling through shops, swimming in the sea. I tried to remain calm, acting as usual, but with each passing hour, the tension between Adam and me grew. Even simple things, like his hand accidentally brushing against mine as he handed me a towel, became sources of anxiety and excitement. Returning to the villa in the evening, I knew this day was only the beginning. The nights at the villa always fell with a special kind of silence. The gentle rustling of the waves breaking on the shore was the only sound accompanying our evenings. James was already asleep, his quiet breathing barely audible from the bedroom. I stood by the window in our room, gazing at the dark expanse of the ocean, illuminated by the dim light of the moon. My head was buzzing with thoughts of the day that had passed, and a growing sense of unease stirred inside me that I couldn't quite explain. Adam. His image had lingered in my mind since our walk through the city. It seemed that every look he gave me was like a slap, awakening my body and soul from a long sleep. I tried to convince myself that it was just a fantasy, that it would pass. But the more I tried to fight these feelings, the stronger they became. The morning brought with it new anxieties. We all gathered on the terrace for breakfast. James discussed the day's plans with Sarah, while I, sipping my coffee, tried to avoid meeting Adam's gaze. He sat across from me, relaxed in his chair, but I felt his presence more intensely than ever. Our eyes met for just a split second, but it was enough to ignite a fire inside me. "I think we should go to the beach," James suggested, putting his cup aside. "The weather is great. We shouldn't waste the day." Everyone agreed, and we headed to the shore. The beach was nearly empty, just a few tourists lazily sunbathing, and a couple of children playing at the water's edge. We spread out our towels, and I immersed myself in a book, trying to distract myself from my thoughts. But the calm didn't last long. After a while, James and Sarah decided to walk to a nearby cafe for drinks. I stayed with Adam. We both remained silent, but the tension between us was almost palpable. Every time he moved, I felt my body respond to his presence. It was like a quiet anticipation of something inevitable. "Are you feeling okay?" he suddenly asked, his voice low and calm. "Yes, I'm fine," I lied, trying to hide my embarrassment. Adam stood up and slowly walked toward the water. He glanced over his shoulder, looked at me, and gave a slight nod toward the ocean, as if inviting me to join him. Everything inside me screamed, "Don't go," but my feet lifted me off the towel, and I followed him. We walked along the sand, its hot surface pleasantly touching my bare feet. The water gently lapped at our ankles, and the breeze tousled my hair. I tried not to think that something was happening between us, but it was impossible to ignore. We walked side by side, not saying a word, but each step was filled with something that couldn't be expressed in words. "Lauren," he finally said quietly, stopping and turning to face me. "I can't pretend anymore that nothing is happening." These words struck like lightning from a clear sky. I froze, not knowing what to say. Inside, I felt so many conflicting emotions: fear, excitement, attraction. I knew I should say something, but my voice betrayed me. "I know you feel it too," Adam continued, his voice softer but resolute. "This isn't just a coincidence, Lauren. It's something more." My heart was pounding so loudly, it seemed the whole world could hear it. I felt my legs trembling, and everything inside me was bursting to come out. I wanted to deny his words, to say it wasn't true, that there was nothing between us, but I couldn't. "Adam, we can't," I finally whispered, trying to regain some control. But he had already stepped closer. His hand gently brushed my cheek, and I froze. That touch was so soft, yet it held so much power that I felt all my defenses start to crumble. "We can," he said, his gaze penetrating the depths of my soul. "We must." Our faces were so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. His eyes never left mine, and at that moment, I realized I could no longer resist. Everything I knew about right and wrong, about morality and duty, vanished in that instant. Only we and this moment remained. His lips met mine slowly, as if he was afraid of doing something wrong. But in that kiss, there was so much tenderness and passion at the same time that I lost myself in time and space. I didn't know how many seconds or minutes had passed, but it no longer mattered. My reality had changed. My heart, my soul, my body belonged to this moment. I pulled away for a brief second to catch my breath, but his arms were already gently holding me close. I knew I should have stopped, that this was wrong, but I couldn't. It was stronger than me. The kiss deepened, his lips insistently moving against mine, and I felt everything inside me melting from his touch. Our bodies became one, and I could no longer think rationally. All my doubts and fears disappeared in this kiss, leaving only pure desire. When we finally broke apart, I couldn't find the words. My head was spinning, and my heart was pounding as if it would burst from my chest. We looked at each other, and in that moment, I realized there was no going back. When we returned to the villa, I still couldn't shake the aftermath of what had happened on the beach. My heart continued to race with the same frantic speed, and every thought circled back to Adam and our kiss. It was wrong, it was dangerous, but I couldn't rid myself of this feeling. Every touch of his, every phrase he spoke seemed to etch itself into me, leaving a mark. I knew I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. James and Sarah were already at the villa when Adam and I came back. They were sitting on the terrace, laughing and discussing plans for the evening. I tried to appear as though nothing had happened, but inside, a storm of emotions was tearing me apart. I sat down next to James, trying to hide my agitation, but Adam was sitting opposite, and every time our eyes met, I felt something inside me freeze. "Lauren, are you okay?" James suddenly asked, looking at me with concern. "Yes, of course, just a little tired," I replied, hoping my voice wouldn't betray my feelings. I avoided looking at Adam. I was too afraid that seeing him again would reignite the feelings I was desperately trying to hide. I understood that it wasn't just a fleeting attraction, not just passion, but something much deeper. Yet I was tormented by guilt towards James. He didn't deserve such betrayal. The evening passed in a relaxed atmosphere. James and Sarah suggested we have a barbecue in the backyard, and we all agreed. But even during dinner, as we ate and chatted, I felt the growing tension between Adam and me. It was like an invisible wall that we both sensed but couldn't break through. As the sun began to set, Sarah and I decided to take a walk on the beach. I hoped the stroll would clear my mind a little and help me deal with the emotions that were beginning to overwhelm me. The beach was nearly empty, and the soft whisper of the waves was our only accompaniment. We walked side by side, and Sarah animatedly talked about her plans for the future, but my thoughts were far away. "You know, Lauren," she suddenly said, "I've noticed that things seem a bit tense between you and James lately. You look happy, but it seems like something's not right." I stopped abruptly and looked at her. Words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say? That I was attracted to her husband? That I had crossed a line I would later regret? No, I couldn't say that, but I also couldn't pretend anymore. "It's fine, Sarah," I replied, trying to infuse my voice with confidence. "I'm probably just a bit tired. Work, worries, you know how it is." She nodded, but I saw doubt in her eyes. She wanted to ask something more, but remained silent, understanding that I wasn't ready for a conversation. When we returned, James and Adam were sitting at the table, talking quietly about something. I saw Adam glance at me briefly, and in his eyes, I again caught that feeling: desire, passion, something that made my heart tighten. I knew that this was just the beginning between us. Late in the evening, I sat in the bedroom, trying to sort my thoughts. James had already gone to bed a long time ago, and I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Adam wouldn't let me rest. Everything that had happened over the past few days had turned my life upside down. I tried to convince myself that it was just a temporary attraction, that it would pass. But the more I thought about it, the less I believed it. A knock on the door made me start. I turned and saw the door slowly open, and Adam's figure appeared in the doorway. My heart stopped, and I could hardly breathe from the excitement. "May I?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried something more than mere politeness. I couldn't find the words. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and I felt the tension in the room increase with each moment. "We need to talk, Lauren," he finally said, closing the door behind him. My heart pounded so hard that I thought James might wake up and hear it. But everything was too quiet, like in a slow-motion reality where it was just Adam and me, and this moment that could change everything. "We can't keep going like this," he continued, taking a step toward me. "I can't pretend I don't have feelings for you." His words seemed to pierce through me. I knew it was all real, that it wasn't just fantasies. I nodded silently, feeling desire and guilt struggling within me. I can't either," I barely whispered. Adam moved closer, and I felt his hand gently touch mine. I knew I couldn't resist any longer. My heart, mind, and body had already made their decision. The morning at the villa was particularly quiet. James had gone off on business again, and Sarah decided to spend the day at the spa, leaving Adam and me alone. We sat at breakfast on the terrace, and the atmosphere was tense, though neither of us mentioned what had happened the night before. I felt something building between us that could no longer be ignored. "Lauren, how about we go shopping?" Adam suggested, breaking the silence. "James asked me to pick up some things for dinner, and we're running low on groceries anyway." I nodded, knowing that it was just a pretext. We both understood that shopping wasn't the real reason for the outing, but it was hard for me to refuse. My heart had already made its decision, and I could no longer resist this attraction. We walked out onto the beach. The morning sun warmed our skin pleasantly, while the sea breeze cooled our thoughts. We walked along the water in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I tried not to look at Adam, but I could feel his presence with every step. Each time his hand accidentally brushed against mine, a fire ignited within me. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help it. "It's so beautiful here," he said quietly, stopping and gazing out at the endless ocean. "It's as if the whole world has gone quiet and it's just us left." I knew he wasn't just talking about the scenery. It was something more. At that moment, I felt that our attraction was impossible to ignore any longer. It was stronger than both of us. "Shall we sit for a moment?" he suggested, pointing to a small sand dune nearby. We sat down on the sand, and I felt my heart begin to race even faster. The waves gently lapped against the shore, their sound the only noise in this quiet corner of the world. Adam sat close by, and the tension between us became almost unbearable. "Lauren," his voice was soft, almost a whisper, but he spoke my name as if he wanted to hold me in this moment forever. I've been trying to resist this, but I can't anymore. I turned to him, and our eyes met. In his gaze, I saw the same feelings that had been tormenting me for the past few days. It was more than just attraction. It was a mixture of desire and fear, passion and prohibition. We both understood that with each passing moment, we were getting closer to a point of no return. "I can't either," I whispered, feeling my voice betray me. His hand reached out gently to mine. When our fingers touched, my heart stopped for a split second, then beat with twice the force. The touch was soft, but it carried all the strength we had been holding back. He moved closer to me, his face just inches from mine. I felt his breath on my skin, his gaze piercing through me. My hands trembled, and I knew that at this moment, neither of us could stop. His lips brushed against mine cautiously, as if testing whether I was ready to take this step. But in the next second, that tentative touch turned into a passionate kiss, filled with tenderness and simultaneous strength, making me lose all sense of time and space. Everything around us disappeared. It was just us and this moment. I felt his arms wrap around me gently, pulling me closer, and my body responded traitorously to every touch. Our kiss deepened, as if in that moment we were both releasing all the emotions we had suppressed for so long. My body melted under his touch, and I could think of nothing but him. We pulled apart only for a moment to catch our breath, but our eyes remained locked. I felt my heart beating so loudly that it seemed like its thump could be heard for miles. "I can't," I whispered, and those words were more of a plea than a confession. "I can't ignore this anymore." Adam said nothing. His hands gently glided over my back, and then he pulled me to him again. His lips found mine once more, and at that moment, I understood that there was no point in resisting anymore. We had gone too far, and stopping it was impossible. We must have spent several hours on the beach, but time seemed to stand still. Every minute, every kiss, every touch was filled with something new and indescribable. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't think about that anymore. My heart belonged to him at that moment, and there was nothing I could do about it. When we finally got up from the sand and headed back to the villa, I couldn't stop thinking about what lay ahead. We knew that everything had changed, and now this secret, this passion, had become a part of our reality. When we returned to the villa, the sun was dipping towards the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of pink and orange. I walked beside Adam, my heart still pounding, as though we had just ended our kiss on the beach. I tried to gather my thoughts, but it was futile. Everything that had happened over the past few hours felt like it had wrapped me in a fog. I knew I had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. As we entered the villa's grounds, I noticed that James and Sarah had returned. Their voices carried from the terrace as they chatted and laughed about something. I felt a surge of guilt rise within me, but along with it came another feeling, a desire to continue what had begun between Adam and me. Adam and I exchanged brief glances. That look conveyed what we couldn't say aloud, but knew was brewing inside both of us, a storm of emotions. I tried to calm myself, to return to normalcy, but I knew it was impossible. Each step I took was infused with this new, forbidden feeling. When we reached the terrace, Sarah was the first to notice us. "Oh, you're back!" she exclaimed. "We were just discussing having a little grill on the beach this evening. What do you think?" I smiled, trying to appear as casual as possible. James looked at me with the same calm assurance I had long been accustomed to seeing in his eyes. He was pleased to see us, but at that moment, I felt that something invisible now stood between us, eroding everything we had built. "That sounds like a great idea," I replied, taking a seat at the table. "Fresh air, the ocean, it'll be wonderful." The evening passed slowly. We prepared food on the grill, laughed, and chatted. Sarah seemed carefree and cheerful as always. James was in his usual state of tranquility, but I felt the tension within me build with each passing hour. I caught Adam's glances, which flared up every time our eyes met. Each time he was near, I felt my whole body responding to his presence. After dinner, we all went to the beach. James and Sarah brought blankets, and we settled on the sand near the water. The evening was warm, and a light sea breeze filled the air with freshness. Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket, leaning against James, and I sat next to Adam, feeling that all my internal waves were crashing again. We gazed at the stars, which had begun to appear in the night sky. The atmosphere around us was so serene that it felt as if the events of the day had been a dream. But I knew it wasn't. It was reality, and this reality had changed everything. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Adam said quietly, looking up at the stars. "Yes," I whispered, though my thoughts were far from the sky. My heart beat in time with his words. I felt his hand slowly slide towards mine, and our fingers touched again, just as they had on the beach earlier. This time, I didn't pull away. My body betrayed me once more, and I felt that same feeling inside me, which could no longer be ignored. We were silent, but in that silence was more than all the words spoken throughout the evening. It was anticipation, the tension that each of us felt but was afraid to express. Sarah had fallen asleep on James's shoulder, and his quiet breathing became barely audible. Adam turned his head slightly and looked at me. In his gaze, I saw everything: passion, doubt, and a desire that could no longer remain hidden. "Lauren," he said softly, his voice barely audible but filled with determination, "we need to talk." I nodded, knowing that this was more than just a suggestion. It was a step towards something bigger, something that would change our lives forever. I understood that if I said yes now, everything from before would disappear. But I couldn't stop myself anymore. "Let's go," I whispered, and we slowly rose from the sand. We moved away from the villa and headed along the beach. The night was cool, but I didn't feel the chill. Inside me burned a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Adam walked beside me, his steps confident, but I knew that he, too, was caught in a storm of emotions. We walked in silence until we reached the edge of a sand dune where the sea washed the shore. Adam stopped and turned to me. I froze, unsure of what to say, but he didn't give me time to think. His hands gently wrapped around me, and before I could comprehend what was happening, his lips were on mine again. This kiss was different. It was filled with desperation, passion, and that unbearable longing that had been pulling us together for the past few days. Everything around us vanished. There was only us and this moment that defined our lives. I responded to the kiss with the same intensity. My heart could no longer resist, and I knew that now we were both fully immersed in this whirlwind. The night was dark, and the stars overhead seemed distant and cold. Adam and I stood at the edge of the beach, our bodies pressed closely together, as if we were both seeking solace in this moment. His arms gently but firmly enveloped me, pulling me closer, while my fingers traced his back, trying to memorize every second. The sea whispered quietly, as if approving of our madness, but the thought still echoed in my mind. This is wrong, but I couldn't stop. His lips found mine again, and the kiss was not merely passion. It was a complete immersion in each other. We could no longer resist the feelings that overwhelmed us. Everything that had been right, everything we had known until that moment, vanished. Only we remained, our kiss, our hands exploring each other's bodies, and the boundless sea that bore witness to our fall. We collapsed onto the sand, oblivious to anything around us except our sensations. His hands caressed my skin, making me forget everything. It felt like liberation from everything that had bound us in the past. I no longer thought about James or Sarah. I didn't think about what would come next. There was only this moment when our bodies melded into one. But suddenly, everything changed. Through the soft murmur of the waves, I heard a voice. It was a scream, fierce, filled with pain and shock. I froze instantly, realizing what had happened. We were not alone. I turned and saw a figure at the edge of the beach. It was Sarah. She stood there, struck as if by lightning, unable to move. Her eyes widened in horror, and her hands trembled. I understood that she had seen us at the height of our intimacy. In the next second, James appeared. He ran to Sarah, embracing her shoulders, but his eyes were already fixed on Adam and me. His face was twisted with anger and pain. He looked at us as if he couldn't believe his eyes, as though what he had seen was the worst nightmare suddenly come true. "What? What are you doing?" His voice cracked into a shout, and at that moment, it felt like the ground beneath me had split open. I couldn't find the words. Everything happening around me blurred before my eyes. I felt my temples throb, and my body grew cold with the realization of what we had done. I glanced at Adam, but he looked as stunned as I felt. "Sarah," Adam whispered, trying to rise from the sand, but she stepped back as if his touch might burn her. "Don't touch me!" she screamed, recoiling further. Her voice was filled with rage, pain, and betrayal. She looked at her husband as if he were a stranger, a traitor who had destroyed everything they had built. I saw her hands shaking, her attempts to breathe, but she couldn't calm down. "I saw everything," Sarah whispered, her voice broken. "You betrayed us." I wanted to say something, explain, apologize, but the words caught in my throat. James moved closer, his face red with anger. "How could you, Lauren?" He looked at me with such pain that I could barely hold his gaze. "I trusted you. We were family." "James, I tried to start, but I didn't know how to continue. No words could change what had already happened." Adam stood silently beside me, and I saw the realization of what he had done twisting his face. He glanced at Sarah, but she could no longer listen. "It's over," she said quietly, her voice sounding cold and lifeless. "We are no longer a family, and you, Lauren, are nothing to me now." I felt her words tear me apart from the inside. What had happened had shattered not only our marriages, but also our bond with Sarah, a bond that had seemed unbreakable. Everything we had built over the years was destroyed in an instant. James silently turned and walked toward the villa, leading Sarah with him. I stood there, unable to move, realizing that my life, as well as Adam's, was now ruined. We stood there in complete silence, surrounded only by the sounds of the ocean, which seemed to have witnessed our catastrophe. After James and Sarah left, Adam and I remained standing on the beach in complete silence. The sand beneath our feet was cold, and the wind from the sea seemed to have turned prickly, as if this world had rejected us just as we had rejected our families. I tried to make sense of what had just happened, but my mind was empty. A sense of void spread around us, and this emptiness was now also between Adam and me. We were silent. There were no words that could describe what we felt. Everything that had happened was our fault, and no excuses could fix it. I glanced at Adam, but he wasn't looking at me. His face was tense, his eyes gazing into the distance, as if he were trying to escape into his thoughts, away from the place where everything had collapsed. "Adam," I finally managed to utter, but my voice sounded as if I were speaking into emptiness. He remained silent for a few more seconds before slowly shaking his head. We can't continue this, Lauren." His voice was quiet, but it carried finality. "It's over." These words hit me like a thunderclap. I knew he was right, but it didn't ease the pain tearing me apart from the inside. Everything that had been between us turned to ash in an instant. Our passion, our attraction, everything vanished the moment Sarah and James saw us. "I love her, Lauren," Adam continued, his voice trembling, though he tried to maintain composure. "Sarah is my life. I can't lose her. I don't want to lose her." I looked at him, feeling the coldness in my chest. Words failed me. This was the moment when I realized I had lost everything. My family, my husband, And even the person to whom I had felt such passion, everyone was gone. My world had crumbled, and I was left alone amidst the ruins. "What about me?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. Adam sighed heavily, his gaze still fixed on the ocean. "I can't be with you, Lauren," he said quietly, as if apologizing for something that couldn't be fixed. "It was a mistake, a huge mistake. What we did, I can't continue this anymore." Each of his words felt like a knife, cutting me into pieces. I knew he was right, but it didn't ease the pain. It was like the final confession that everything I had believed in the past days had been a lie. "Sarah doesn't want to see me anymore," he continued, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes. She said I no longer exist for her." His voice broke, and I felt my heart tighten. He really loved her. It wasn't just a physical connection, not just passion. Adam wanted to save his relationship with Sarah, but now it was impossible. "I destroyed everything we had," he whispered, his gaze still fixed. "She won't forgive me." I didn't know what to say. All my words seemed empty and meaningless. We both knew it was the end of everything. "Adam," I tried again, but he shook his head, stopping me. "I'm sorry, Lauren." His voice was soft but resolute. We both knew this couldn't continue. I should have stopped earlier, but now everything is lost. He turned and slowly headed back to the villa. I stood there, unable to move. Everything inside me screamed. But on the outside, I was motionless, as if frozen in that moment. I watched him leave and understood that this was the last time I would see him like this. The last time we were anything unified. I was left alone on the beach, surrounded only by the silence of the night and the sound of the waves. We had destroyed not only our lives, but also the lives of those we loved. And now, each of our families was shattered into pieces. When I returned to the villa, it was already empty. James had left a short note on the table. "Leaving. I hope you can one day explain to yourself what you've done." Inside me, everything broke. He left no chance for conversation or explanation. He was gone, forever. Sarah also decided to leave Adam. I found out a few days later when I went to town to pick up some things. One of the acquaintances told me she had packed her things and left, leaving Adam only a brief message that she didn't want to see him anymore. Now, all four of us were alone. We had destroyed our families, our lives, and none of us could reclaim what had been lost. I returned to the villa and sat on the bed, hugging myself. Night had fallen on the coast again, and I heard the same whisper of the waves that accompanied us when it all began. But now that whisper had grown quieter. It was as empty and lonely as I was. After that night, everything seemed to collapse in an instant. The silence that surrounded me in the house became unbearable. I was alone in the villa, and every corner reminded me of what had happened. Memories surfaced on their own, like vengeful ghosts from the past. The horror of realizing that I had lost everything weighed on me with each passing minute. The first morning without James was particularly tough. I woke up in a cold, empty bed, and the silence of the house pressed down on me like a heavy burden. No sounds, no presence. Only the whisper of the waves, too faint to soothe my torment. James had been my world, my support. And now he was gone. His kind words, his calmness that always helped me maintain balance, were no longer there. And most importantly, his forgiveness was absent. I knew he wouldn't forgive me. Days flowed like through a fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, moments with James appeared before me. His smile, his caring gaze, the times he had supported me in difficult moments. I remembered all the moments we had shared and realized how irreparably I had destroyed them all. I tried to contact him, but his phone was turned off. I sent him messages, but they went unanswered. No news, no signals. This silence was killing me. I knew he had decided to leave forever. And this realization was like a knife lodged in my chest, twisting and deepening the wound with each passing day. One day, a few weeks after James left, I received a letter. It was an official divorce notification. Inside the envelope were documents clearly stating that James wanted to end our marriage. I stared at the papers for a long time, my hands trembling, my breath becoming erratic. The words on the paper were harsh and cold, just like the fact that our marriage now boiled down to an official procedure. I knew it was inevitable, but seeing it on paper was like receiving the final blow. Everything I had considered unshakable in my life had crumbled, and I was the cause of this destruction. The first steps in preparing for the divorce were the most agonizing. I met with a lawyer to discuss the terms. The meeting took place in a sterile office surrounded by cold white walls. I sat across from a man in a formal suit who read the documents with such ease as if it were a mere formality. But for me, it was a farewell to my past life, and every item in those documents hurt me more deeply. "The divorce will proceed without disputes," said the lawyer, his voice neutral, almost unemotional. "James agrees to leave you the house, but he insists on dividing all other assets." I nodded, trying not to cry right there. It was fair. James had always been honest and just, even when I had destroyed his life. "He doesn't require alimony," continued the lawyer, "but wants to retain rights to all joint property outside of your home." I nodded again, unable to find the strength to object. These documents were the final blow to our marriage, and I knew there was nothing I could do to fix it. We signed all the necessary papers, and I walked outside, feeling empty. The city seemed as cold as that office. I stood on the sidewalk, looking around, but nothing mattered anymore. Everything I had was gone. The last days before the final divorce hearing were unbearable. I realized that divorce wasn't just a legal procedure. It was the end of an entire era of my life. It was a farewell to the person who loved me and was with me through difficult times, the person who deserved more than I could give. The day of the hearing came too quickly. I stood before the court, holding all the documents. James didn't show up. I knew he wouldn't want to see me. And perhaps that was for the best. I could no longer bear to look him in the eyes after what had happened. The judge read the decrees, and I barely heard his voice. Inside me was a void. Everything I had, loved, and made up my life disappeared in an instant, and I had destroyed it. When the judge signed the final document and our marriage was officially dissolved, I felt something inside me break completely. It was the end of my life as I had known it. I was no longer James's wife, no longer the woman I once was. I was alone. Stepping out of the courtroom, I paused on the steps, looking at the people around me. They were rushing about their business, ignoring others' problems, and I stood there, feeling my ability to move on slowly fading away. After the divorce, life became an endless succession of empty days. I tried to piece myself together, recover, return to normalcy, but every time I thought I had taken a step forward, I was overwhelmed again by a wave of hopelessness. Everything that once seemed stable and familiar had vanished, and the new life I so desperately tried to find meaning in turned out to be far from my expectations. In the first weeks, I threw myself into work. I thought it would be my salvation. From early morning until late evening, I sat at my computer, immersed in endless reports and projects. I believed that if I kept myself busy enough, I could forget what had happened. But even among the numbers and documents, my thoughts constantly returned to James, to Adam, to that night on the beach that had shattered everything. Evenings were particularly hard. I came home to an empty house where every corner reminded me of the past. The bedroom was cold and lifeless without James, and the kitchen missed his presence, his quiet conversations over dinner, his laughter that always filled the house with warmth. Now these rooms felt alien. The home that once was our shared refuge had become a prison of memories for me. I tried to take up something new. I enrolled in a painting class, hoping that creativity would help me find comfort. But every time I sat in front of the easel, my hands seemed to freeze. I couldn't express my feelings on the canvas, because inside, there was only emptiness. Instead of finding solace in this activity, I only sank deeper into my regrets and pain. Friends who used to be close also gradually distanced themselves. No one knew how to talk to me. They knew about the divorce, about what had happened, but no one wanted to bring it up. I saw how they tried to be careful in conversations, avoided questions about James, about our relationship. They offered to meet, invited me to dinners, but every time I was among them, I felt like a stranger. I couldn't find the strength to laugh with them, discuss trivial matters as I once did. Everything seemed so distant and unreal. One day, I tried to start over. I moved to a new apartment, away from the house full of memories. I thought that changing the environment would help me break free from the past. But even in the new place, I felt the walls pressing down on me. The things around me no longer brought joy. Everything I tried to do to build a new life seemed futile. The emptiness inside me didn't disappear. It only grew deeper. I even tried dating, hoping that new acquaintances would help me distract myself and forget the pain. But every time I sat across from another man, images of James resurfaced in my mind. His voice, his smile, his touch. None of these people could fill the void left after our breakup. I tried to be friendly, open, but every time I left these meetings, I felt even more alone. My attempt to build a new life was turning into an endless struggle with myself. I realized that what I had lost could not be returned, but I couldn't find a way to fill this loss with something new. My life was like an old mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. And every time I tried to piece them together, it felt like I was cutting myself on them even more. Eventually, I understood that nothing was working. Everything I did, work, hobbies, new acquaintances, was just an attempt to fill the void. But that void was too deep to be patched up. The past haunted me every day, and no effort could erase it. One evening, sitting in my new home, I realized that my new life was nothing but an illusion. I tried to build something on the ruins, but those ruins wouldn't let me move forward. I was still a prisoner of my past, and everything I tried to do brought nothing but new disappointments. From that moment on, I began to wonder, is there even a way to restore my life? Or is this punishment for my actions, to remain alone, forever seeking solace that will never come? Life without James, without family, without the people who were dear to me, had become a trial. If I could go back, everything would be different. I often wonder what would have happened if I had stopped in time. What if I hadn't succumbed to passion, hadn't taken that foolish step that shattered my life and the lives of those I loved? The answers to these questions no longer matter. I'm left alone, and no attempts to fix it have succeeded. I want to give you one piece of advice. Don't repeat my mistakes. Passion is an immediate emotion, but its consequences can last a lifetime. One thoughtless step can destroy everything you value. In my case, this action deprived me of family, love, and meaning. I am alone not because I was betrayed, but because I betrayed those who trusted me. It is not worth sacrificing what truly matters for something temporary.